"You're lucky to have this job," Marcus sneered, leaning back in his leather chair like he'd just bestowed a precious gift instead of an insult. His eyes narrowed slightly, watching for my reaction while HR Director Patricia pretended to type notes on her laptop. I could see her screen was just displaying the company screensaver. "We have 20 applicants who would take your salary in a heartbeat." The conference room suddenly felt colder, smaller, like the walls were closing in on this moment of perfect clarity. That's when I knew I wasn't just going to leave this company. I was going to take it apart, piece by valuable piece. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I wasn't asking for anything outrageous. Just a standard cost of living adjustment after 3 years of stellar performance reviews and bringing in clients that doubled our agency's portfolio. Meanwhile, Marcus had approved an unnecessary office renovation, including a meditation room nobody used and a fancy espresso machine that broke weekly. The math didn't add up, but his ego always did. I sat there, letting his words hang between us like smoke. Something shifted inside me in that moment, not anger, but something colder and more calculated. I smiled politely, thanked them both for their time, gathered my portfolio, and walked out with perfect composure. The door clicked shut behind me with satisfying finality. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and texted a single name, Alexandra. No explanation needed. She'd been recruiting me for her boutique digital marketing firm for months, and I'd been politely declining. Not anymore. The game had changed, and so had the rules. If you've ever had a boss like Marcus, someone who treats talent like it's disposable while taking credit for your wins, hit that subscribe button. I'm building toward 50K subscribers, and nothing fuels a revenge story quite like an audience cheering from the sidelines. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. Colleagues laughed and chatted around me, completely unaware that I had just mentally resigned and was already planning my strategic exit. These were the same people who watched Marcus take credit for my campaigns at the quarterly meeting last month, the same ones who stayed silent when he interrupted me in client calls. Their comfort in this broken system wasn't my problem anymore. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began answering emails as if nothing had changed. Responded to client questions, scheduled next week's meetings, approved a design mock-up. But inside, gears were turning, calculations being made. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a chess player, and every move from this point forward would be deliberate. Marcus had no idea what he'd just activated. He thought he was reminding me of my place, but he'd actually freed me from any loyalty I might have still felt. The final thread had snapped, and I was now operating with perfect clarity and zero emotional attachment. This story really begins 6 months earlier, when I first noticed the pattern. Marcus promoting junior staff who played golf with him while overlooking senior women with twice the experience. The way client feedback got filtered and sanitized before it reached the executive level. How the books always seemed to balance perfectly despite growing overhead and shrinking deliverables. I'd started preparing even then, though I didn't know exactly what for. Call it intuition or self-preservation, but I'd been quietly documenting everything. Every strategy one developed, every client relationship I nurtured, every process I streamlined, all carefully recorded in my personal drive, not the company server. I'd been building my own insurance policy without even realizing I'd need to cash it in. By the time Marcus decided I should be grateful for my job, I had already created a shadow version of my role, one that existed independently of Vertex Digital Marketing. I had already begun mentoring my assistant, Zoe, showing her just enough of my workflow to keep things running, but holding back the critical client insights that made me valuable. Teaching without truly transferring knowledge is an art form few understand until they need it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from energy, that electric feeling when a plan starts taking shape, when possibilities suddenly align. My apartment felt too small to contain what was building inside me. I opened my laptop at 2 a.m. and started organizing what would become my exit strategy. First, the clients. I managed our top 5 accounts, Neuratech, a rising AI firm that trusted me implicitly. Garrison Properties, a family-owned real estate developer who hated dealing with anyone else. Lumina Health, whose CMO called me directly instead of going through official channels. Apex Outdoor, whose rebrand I'd orchestrated to industry acclaim. And Bluescale Finance, our newest but fastest-growing client. Together, they represented just over $400,000 in annual billing, the backbone of our agency's stable income. What Marcus never understood was that these weren't just accounts. They were relationships I had cultivated meticulously. I remembered their children's names, sent handwritten notes after successful campaigns, stayed up reading their quarterly reports to spot opportunities before they even knew they needed something. I wasn't just servicing these clients, I was partnering with them. In the morning, I dressed with particular care, a charcoal blazer I saved for client presentations, simple gold earrings, subtle makeup. Nothing that screamed, I'm planning corporate sabotage, but polished enough to command respect. Image matters when you're playing the long game. For the next 2 weeks, I was the model employee. Arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for the committee planning the holiday party. I laughed at Marcus's recycled jokes in meetings and nodded appreciatively when he rephrased my ideas as his own. Each act of deference was a screen, hiding the methodical dismantling happening behind it. During these weeks, I accelerated my documentation efforts. Every process, every client preference, every workaround for our clunky CRM system, all captured in meticulous detail, not for the company, but for me. Knowledge is currency in service businesses, and I was making sure my wallet would be full when I walked out the door. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I also began shifting client communications. Nothing obvious, Marcus still got the weekly reports and sat in on the quarterly reviews, but I started having more informal check-ins, directly with decision makers. Quick calls that never appeared on the shared calendar, coffee meetings disguised as casual catch-ups. Building private channels that existed outside the company's visibility. Emily, how's the new campaign performing? Marcus asked during our Monday team meeting, referring to the Neurotech social media rollout I designed. On target, I replied, sharing just enough metrics to satisfy without revealing the deeper insights I discussed privately with Neurotecha's marketing director. The day before. We're seeing engagement rates about 15% above industry average. Good, he nodded, already moving on to the next agenda item, unaware that in that private conversation, I'd also helped the client articulate what they actually needed. From their agency partner, a roadmap Marcus couldn't deliver without me. The art of becoming indispensable while preparing to disappear requires balance. Too visible, and your departure becomes a crisis they'll fight to prevent. Too invisible, and your absence won't create the leverage you need. I was aiming for the sweet spot, the irreplaceable specialist who somehow slips through your fingers before you realize what you're losing. My assistant Zoe was crucial to this equation. Bright, eager, and completely loyal, to me, not the company. I'd rescued her from the admin pool when I noticed her redesigning our presentation templates in her spare time. Marcus had barely approved her transfer to my team, seeing her as just another assistant rather than the talented designer she was. Zoe, I want you to take point on the Garrison Properties meeting next week, I told her one afternoon, watching her eyes widen with both excitement and terror. Are you sure? Mr. Garrison always asks for you specifically. Which is why you need to start building that relationship, I explained. I'll be there, but you'll lead. It's time you got more client exposure. What I didn't tell her was that I was teaching her to be my proxy, someone who could maintain continuity when I was gone. Not because I cared about Vertex's stability, but because I wanted clients to have a positive experience even in my absence. The goal wasn't to burn everything down, but to extract maximum value while leaving minimally scorched earth. Meanwhile, I began responding to those recruiter emails I'd been ignoring. Not just Alexandra's boutique agency, but others who had been circling for months. Quick, casual coffees before work. Lunches disguised as personal appointments. Each conversation the same, I wasn't actively looking, but for the right opportunity, I might consider a move. These meetings served two purposes, building options for myself and creating whispers in the industry. Nothing spreads faster in agency circles than talent on the move, and I wanted that rumor mill grinding before I made any official announcements. Samantha Collins, CEO of Prism Digital Collective, leaned across our corner table at a cafe 6 blocks from my office. Emily, I'll be blunt. We need someone with your client portfolio and strategic vision. Name your price. I smiled, stirring my tea deliberately. It's not just about compensation, Samantha. It's about culture, autonomy, and growth potential. All of which we offer in spades, she countered, sliding a folder across the table. Plus, we're not afraid to invest in talent. I didn't open the folder there, that would seem too eager, but when I reviewed it later, the number made me pause. 40% above my current salary, plus performance bonuses and equity options. Marcus's "you're lucky" speech echoed in my head, making the contrast even sharper. Still, I didn't commit. Not yet. The pieces weren't all in place, and rushing would jeopardize the entire operation. Patience is the difference between revenge and revolution. Back at the office, I continued my performance of the dedicated employee while systematically creating distance between myself and the company infrastructure. I moved client contacts to my personal phone. Downloaded portfolio samples in case Studies to my home computer. Cleared personal items from my desk one small object at a time, so gradually no one noticed my space becoming more sterile. The most delicate part was managing client expectations without tipping my hand. Neuratech's VP of Marketing, Diane, caught me off guard during our monthly review. Emily, we're planning our Q2 strategy and budgeting for agency support. You'll still be our lead then, right? Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. The team structure remains unchanged for now, I replied carefully, neither confirming nor denying. But I always ensure continuity regardless of who sits in which chair. She nodded slowly, processing my non-answer. Interesting choice of words. Let's grab dinner next week, just us. There are some things I'd like to discuss outside these walls. That dinner would become pivotal, but I didn't know it yet. I simply marked my calendar and continued the methodical work of extracting myself from Vertex while remaining visibly present. The company holiday party provided unexpected opportunity. Held at an overpriced venue with an open bar and mediocre catering, it was exactly the kind of event where people let their guards down. Marcus certainly did, drinking premium whiskey and holding court near the DJ booth, telling increasingly loud stories about saving difficult client relationships that I had actually managed. I circulated strategically, spending time with key internal stakeholders, complimenting the right people, laughing at the right moments. All while observing which executives from client companies had attended and making sure to have meaningful conversations with each one. Halfway through the evening, I found myself beside Walter Garrison, the patriarch of Garrison Properties. At the bar. He was nursing a club soda, looking uncomfortable in the increasingly rowdy atmosphere. Not your scene? I asked, ordering sparkling water for myself. He chuckled. I'm too old for these things, Emily. But my son insisted we make an appearance to maintain relationships. He used air quotes around the phrase, his skepticism evident. Well, I appreciate you coming. How's the Charleston development progressing? His eyes lit up at the mention of his pet project, and we spent the next 20 minutes discussing the details of the mixed-use property he was developing in South Carolina, a conversation that had nothing to do with our agency services but everything to do with strengthening our personal connection. As we talked, I noticed Marcus watching us from across the room, his expression a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. He knew Walter Garrison rarely attended these functions and spoke even more rarely to agency staff beyond required meetings. Yet here he was, engaged in animated conversation with me, completely ignoring the agency founder who had tried to corner him earlier. When Marcus eventually made his way over, Walter checked his watch and excused himself. Emily, send me those articles on sustainable building materials we discussed. Looking forward to our call next week. What articles? Marcus asked as Walter walked away. Just some research I found that aligns with their new development goals, I said casually. Walter's particularly interested in green certification options. Since when does Walter Garrison care about green anything except money? Marcus laughed at his own joke, unaware that I'd spent months learning about Walter's shifting priorities, including his newfound environmental concerns following his first grandchild's birth. People evolve, I said simply, and excused myself to speak with Lumina Health's marketing director. That night crystallized something important. Marcus didn't actually know our clients. He knew their contracts, their billing rates, their service agreements, but not their passions, their pressures, their personal motivations. He saw them as revenue streams. I saw them as human beings with complex needs that extended far beyond marketing deliverables. This distinction would prove crucial in what came next. The dinner with Diane from Neuratech happened on a Tuesday evening at a small Italian restaurant far from our usual business haunts. We ordered wine and appetizers, making small talk until the waiter left us alone with our entrees. So, she said, twirling pasta around her fork, when are you leaving Vertex, and what should we do about it? The directness of the question nearly made me choke on my water. What makes you think I'm leaving? She gave me a knowing look. Emily, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I recognize the signs. The careful language, the gradual introduction of team members into client calls, the way you've been knowledge transferring to your assistant. Classic pre-exit behavior. She took a sip of wine. Plus, I heard through the grapevine that you had coffee with Samantha Collins last month. I considered denying it, then decided truth was the better strategy. Nothing's official. But something's in motion, she pressed. Look, I'm not asking to create problems. Quite the opposite. Neuratech values our relationship with you, not just with Vertex. If you're making a move, we need to consider our options. This was the moment, earlier than I'd planned, but opportunity rarely follows our preferred timeline. Hypothetically speaking, what would those options look like? Diane smiled. Hypothetically? We have a 60-day out clause in our contract. And hypothetically, we've been approached by several agencies recently, none of which interested us because we have you. But if you weren't at Vertex? Hypothetically, I continued her thought, timing and communication would be everything. Exactly. She raised her glass slightly. To hypotheticals. We spent the rest of dinner discussing Neuroteca's upcoming product launch, as if we hadn't just outlined the potential departure of their largest agency relationship. Professional to the core, both of us. As I drove home that night, I realized the timeline had accelerated. If Diane had noticed my preparation, others might too. I needed to finalize my landing spot before word reached Marcus. I called Alexandra. The next morning. Let's talk seriously. What would it look like if I came on board? 2 hours later, I was sitting in her office, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick and abundant natural light, so different from Vertex's sterile corporate environment. She laid out her vision, a partner-level position, leading strategy and client relationships, building a team from scratch with full autonomy. And yes, she added, answering my unasked question, we could accommodate certain client transitions, assuming all contractual obligations are respected. By the time I left, we had the framework of an agreement. Nothing signed, nothing official, but a clear path forward. I felt simultaneously lighter and more focused than I had in months. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in professional discretion. I continued performing my role at Vertex flawlessly while laying groundwork for my departure. Each day brought another small, invisible step, updating my portfolio, transferring personal files, documenting client histories, preparing Zoe to handle the transition. Marcus remained oblivious, too absorbed in a new business pitch to notice the subtle shifts. He even assigned me additional client responsibilities, which I accepted without complaint, knowing each new relationship was potential leverage. Emily, I need you to take point on the Westbrook presentation, he announced in our team meeting. Their CEO specifically requested our best strategic thinker, and, well. He gestured vaguely, implying I was the obvious choice while simultaneously avoiding giving me direct credit. Happy to help, I replied, my voice professional while my mind calculated how this new connection might factor into my plans. The delicate balance was maintaining perfect performance while creating subtle distance, being invaluable without becoming irreplaceable in a way that would trigger alarms. It's like slowly removing your hand from beneath a sleeping baby, move too quickly and everything falls apart. I had dinner with Alexandra twice more, finalizing details of my new role. We agreed on a start date 6 weeks out, giving me time to execute a clean exit from Vertex. The contract was ready, waiting only for my signature to make it official. Then came the catalyst that accelerated everything. Marcus called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon, his expression unusually serious. Close the door, he said, not looking up from his computer. Once I was seated, he turned the screen toward me. Want to explain this? It was an email from Lumina Health CMO to Marcus, inquiring about rumors of staffing changes and expressing concern about continuity on their account. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm not aware of any staffing changes, I said carefully. Don't play dumb, Emily. Someone from Prism Digital has been reaching out to our clients, suggesting you might be joining them soon. His eyes narrowed. Is there something you want to tell me? This wasn't how I'd planned it. Samantha at Prism must have jumped the gun, assuming my interest was confirmation. A rookie mistake that had now forced my hand. I've had conversations, I admitted, seeing no benefit in lying. As professionals in this industry do. Nothing is finalized. Conversations? His voice rose slightly. While managing our biggest clients? That's not just unprofessional, it's potentially actionable. Is it? I kept my tone even. Like telling an employee who generated over $400,000 in client revenue last year that they're lucky to have a job, instead of approving a standard cost of living adjustment? His face flushed, but he recovered quickly. That's different. That was a business decision based on company financials. So as exploring my options, I countered. Also a business decision. We stared at each other across his desk, the pretense of harmony finally dropped. Marcus broke first. What do you want, Emily? A raise? Title change? Just tell me what it'll take to end this disruption. And there it was, the confirmation that he saw me as a problem to solve, not a professional to respect. Not a recognition of value, just damage control. I don't want anything from you, Marcus. The words came out calmer than I felt. I've given this company 3 years of exceptional work, brought in top-tier clients, mentored junior staff, and helped build our reputation. And when I asked for basic recognition of that contribution, you told me I should be grateful for the opportunity. So now I'm creating my own opportunities. He leaned back, reassessing. You're actually leaving. I am. When? My resignation letter will be on your desk tomorrow morning. He laughed, though there was no humor in it. And you think you're taking clients with you? That's not how this works. They're contracted to Vertex, not to you personally. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Clients make their own decisions based on where they feel best served. I've never and would never violate contractual obligations or non-solicitation agreements. All technically true, even if I had laid considerable groundwork. This conversation isn't over, he called as I reached the door. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Actually, Marcus, it is. It was over the moment you decided I should be grateful rather than valued. Walking back to my desk, I felt strangely calm. The confrontation had forced acceleration, but the foundation was solid. Now, it was just a matter of execution. I texted Alexandra, timeline moved up. Need to finalize contract tonight. Then I called Zoe to my desk. Change of plans, I told her quietly. I need you to be ready for some turbulence. What kind of turbulence? Her eyes widened. The kind that creates opportunities for people who stay calm in a storm. That night, I signed my contract with Alexandra's firm, Elevate Strategic Partners, over dinner at her home. Not just an employment agreement, but a partnership track with equity potential and a clear path to leadership. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. And clean endings, I added, thinking of the resignation letter saved on my laptop, ready to be printed and delivered first thing tomorrow. The wheels were in motion now, and there would be no stopping what came next. Marcus had unknowingly accelerated his own reckoning, and I was finally ready to show him exactly what lucky to have a job really meant. I arrived at the office early the next morning, resignation letter in a sealed envelope tucked into my portfolio. The building was quiet at 7:15 a.m., just the cleaning staff and a few overachievers tapping away in distant cubicles. Perfect. I wanted this moment to be private, dignified. The antithesis of that humiliating meeting where Marcus had dismissed my worth with a smirk. I placed the envelope squarely in the center of his desk, aligned perfectly with the edge, one final act of precision in a workplace that had never truly valued it. Then I returned to my desk and began the methodical process of digital departure. Removing personal bookmarks, clearing browser history, transferring remaining files to my external drive. All traces of Emily Chen, systematically erased. By 8:30, my desk looked strangely impersonal, as if I'd never really occupied the space. I'd been gradually removing personal items for weeks, the plant now thriving on my kitchen windowsill, the framed design award now hanging in my home office, the collection of business books now boxed in my apartment. Today I removed only the final traces, a spare phone charger, a company notebook, a single framed photo of my graduation. Nothing that would signal dramatic departure to the casual observer. Marcus arrived at 8:47, coffee in hand, chatting with the creative director. As they walked past my desk, he nodded in my direction, a perfunctory acknowledgement that revealed nothing about our confrontation yesterday. Professional masks firmly in place. The game continued. At 9:14, my phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra, contract countersigned. Welcome aboard, partner. I allowed myself a small smile, then turned my attention to Zoe, who had just arrived, bright-eyed and oblivious to the seismic shift about to rock her professional world. Morning meeting in the small conference room? I suggested casually. I have some projects I'd like to transition to you. Sure thing, she said, dropping her bag at her desk. Let me grab my notebook. In the conference room, with the door firmly closed, I laid out the situation with clinical precision. I've resigned, effective immediately. My letter is on Marcus's desk. He'll find it soon. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. You have a choice to make, and I won't pressure you either way. Option 1, stay at Vertex. You're well positioned to take on more responsibility in my absence. Marcus will need someone who understands my clients and processes. I paused, making sure she was following. Option 2, I can't offer you anything officially right now, but my new firm will be building a team soon. If you're patient and perform well during this transition, there could be a place for you. You're actually leaving, she whispered. The reality sinking in. Where are you going? Elevate Strategic Partners. Small but growing, with a focus on the kind of clients we both enjoy working with. The ones Marcus calls high maintenance. The ones who appreciate strategic thinking and attention to detail, I corrected with a smile. She nodded slowly, processing. What happens now? Chaos, most likely. But also opportunity. Watch how Marcus handles this, who he blames, who he elevates. It will tell you everything about whether this is a place you want to build a career. And the clients? Neurotech, Garrison, Lumina? Have their own decisions to make, I said carefully. I've never and would never violate my non-solicitation agreement. But clients choose their agency partners based on who delivers value. Understanding dawned in her eyes. So when they call asking where you've gone, you can truthfully say you don't know my plans, I finished for her. Because officially, you don't. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing. A text from the receptionist, Marcus looking for you. Urgent. I stood, straightening my jacket. Showtime. Good luck, Zoe said, her expression a mixture of anxiety and admiration. It's not about luck, I replied, heading for the door. It's about preparation meeting opportunity. Marcus was standing behind his desk when I entered his office, my resignation letter pinched between his fingers like something distasteful. What the hell is this? He demanded, waving the paper. My resignation, effective immediately, I said calmly, remaining standing though he hadn't invited me to sit. As required by my employment agreement, I've already transferred all current projects to appropriate team members and prepared transition documentation. You can't just quit without notice, he sputtered. We have client deliverables, presentations scheduled, all addressed in the transition plan attached to my letter, I interrupted smoothly. Zoe is fully briefed on all active projects and can direct the team appropriately. Zoe? He practically spat the name. Your assistant? She can't handle Neurotech or Garrison, they specifically request you for every meeting. She's been managing more of their day-to-day than you realize, I said. And she's quite capable, despite your persistent underestimation of her talents. His face flushed, anger warring with calculation behind his eyes. He switched tactics, his voice softening to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. Emily, let's not be hasty. If this is about our conversation regarding compensation, I'm sure we can revisit that discussion. The company financials have improved since then. How convenient that funds suddenly materialized when he feared losing a revenue generator. I let the silence stretch, watching him grow increasingly uncomfortable. This isn't a negotiation, Marcus. I've accepted a position elsewhere. Where? He demanded. That's not relevant to my departure. His eyes narrowed. It's relevant if you're planning to violate your non-compete or steal our clients. I'm well aware of my contractual obligations, I said evenly. And clients make their own decisions about agency partnerships. So you have been talking to them, he accused, latching onto the implication. I've maintained the same professional relationships I've always had, I replied, which was technically true. I hadn't changed my behavior, I'd simply been building those relationships with deliberate care all along. He slammed the letter down on his desk. HR will need to conduct an exit interview. And I'll need all company property returned immediately. Already arranged. My laptop is with IT for data wiping, my key card is with security, and all documents have been transferred to the appropriate team members. My thorough preparation seemed to further infuriate him. He wanted drama, resistance, something he could use to paint me as unprofessional. Instead, he got calm, methodical compliance that gave him no ammunition. This is a mistake, he said finally, his tone shifting to condescension. Agencies like ours have long memories, Emily. Bridges burned now can haunt your career for years. I smiled, not a warm smile but one of perfect clarity. Interesting perspective. I see it differently. I believe that talent, integrity, and client results speak louder than agency politics. But I appreciate your concern for my professional future. Before he could respond, I extended my hand. I wish you and Vertex continued success, Marcus. He stared at my outstretched hand for a moment before giving it a brief, perfunctory shake. HR will be in touch about final paperwork. I nodded and turned to leave. At the door, I paused, unable to resist one parting shot. Oh, and Marcus? Perhaps in the future, remember that telling talented people they're lucky to have a job is rarely an effective retention strategy. I closed the door behind me before he could respond, heart pounding but steps steady as I walked through the open office. Colleagues watched curiously, word had obviously begun to spread. I smiled and nodded as I passed, projecting confidence rather than triumph. The victory lap would come later. For now, dignity was the goal. Zoe intercepted me near my desk. Marcus just sent an all-staff email saying you're pursuing other opportunities and thanking you for your contributions, she whispered. That was fast. Damage control, I explained, gathering the last of my belongings into my tote bag. He's trying to control the narrative before rumors start. Too late, she replied. The creative team is already speculating about which clients might follow you. I kept my expression neutral despite the satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. Companies lose employees every day. It's just business. Not employees who manage almost $500,000 in client billing, she countered. Well, That will be in Vertex's hands now. I shouldered my bag and gave her a meaningful look. Watch your inbox. The next 48 hours will be revealing. I walked out of Vertex Digital Marketing at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 years. And 4 months after I'd first walked in. No fanfare, no goodbye party, no cake in the conference room. Just a quiet departure that belied the earthquake about to ripple through the agency's client roster. The first call came before I'd even reached my car. Neurotecha's Diane, her tone knowing. So, it happened. News travels fast, I observed, unlocking my car remotely. Marcus just sent an emergency email to all clients announcing your departure and assuring us of continuity. Bit desperate, if you ask me. I slid into the driver's seat, closing the door before responding. What did you tell him? That we appreciate the update and will be evaluating our agency relationships as part of our regular quarterly review process. Her voice carried a smile. Very corporate, very non-committal. Appropriate, I agreed. Coffee tomorrow, she suggested. My office, 9 a.m. Bring information about your new situation. I'll be there. By the time I arrived home, my phone was buzzing constantly. Colleagues expressing surprise. Industry contacts fishing for details. Recruiters suddenly remembering my existence. I responded selectively, maintaining professional discretion while allowing certain strategic information to filter through the industry grapevine. Alexandra called mid-afternoon. The market is humming with your news. 3 people have already asked if you're joining us. What did you tell them? That we don't comment on personnel matters until appropriate announcements are ready, she said. But I didn't deny it either. The speculation is good for us, positions elevate as a growing force capable of attracting top talent. Marcus is in full damage control mode, I told her. All staff announcement, client emails, probably calling in favors from every relationship he's ever had. Let him scramble, she said dismissively. We're focused on building, not reacting. Speaking of which, your office will be ready next Monday. In the meantime, you can work from home or use our conference room if you need meeting space. I have coffee with Diane from Neurotech tomorrow morning. Perfect timing. Their contract with Vertex has a 30-day review clause if key personnel change. Did you happen to know that? Her tone was innocently curious. I might have reviewed all client contracts as part of my regular account management duties, I replied with equal innocence. She laughed. I knew we'd work well together. Keep me posted. The next 48 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Coffee with Diane led to a formal meeting with Neurotecha's executive team. Lunch with Walter Garrison turned into an invitation to present Elevate's capabilities to his leadership group. Lumina Health CMO called directly, not even bothering with pretense, we're invoking our key personnel clause. What's your timeline at the new place? By Friday, just 3 days after my resignation, the industry was buzzing with speculation about a mass client exodus from Vertex. I maintained public silence, letting the rumors swirl while methodically laying groundwork with Alexandra to ensure we could actually deliver on the expectations I was setting with these clients. Meanwhile, Marcus's damage control efforts grew. Increasingly desperate. Zoe reported that he'd personally taken over my accounts, sitting in on calls where he was clearly out of his depth on the details. He'd slashed fees for one nervous client, promised impossible deadlines to another, and was badmouthing me to anyone who would listen, claiming I'd been secretly plotting for months while underperforming. He called an all-hands yesterday. Zoe texted me. Announced a restructuring that basically distributes your workload across 3 junior people who have no idea what they're doing. Also implied you were disgruntled and had performance issues that led to your departure. Predictable, I replied. How's the team taking it? 2 people from creative already have doctor appointments that mysteriously coincide with interview times. And accounting is freaking out because they finally realized how much billing is tied to your clients. I smiled at that. The financial impact wouldn't be fully felt until the client departures became official, but the tremors were starting. Marcus was feeling the ground shift beneath his carefully constructed kingdom. On Monday morning, I walked into Elevate Strategic Partners. As a full partner with equity stake, a far cry from the lucky to have a job status Marcus had assigned me. The office hummed with energy, everyone aware that something significant was happening but maintaining professional discretion. Alexandra had arranged a welcome breakfast, introducing me to the team of 12 who would now be my colleagues rather than competitors. The contrast with Vertex was striking. Here, accomplishments were acknowledged openly, collaboration valued over hierarchy, innovation encouraged rather than controlled. Emily brings not only her strategic expertise, Alexandra told the gathered team, but a vision for client partnerships that aligns perfectly with our ethos at Elevate. This isn't just a new hire, this is a transformative addition to our leadership. The validation was sweet, but the real satisfaction came later that week when the first contracts were officially signed. Neuratech transferred their business. First, exercising their key personnel clause with clinical precision. Garrison Properties followed, with Walter himself calling Marcus to explain that their relationship had evolved in a different direction. Lumina Health took slightly longer, requiring board approval, but by month's end, they too had transitioned to Elevate. The final tally was staggering even to me: $412,000 in annual billing, shifted from Vertex to Elevate in less than 30 days. Not because I had violated any agreements or actively poached clients, but because I had spent years building relationships based on value, trust, and results, elements that traveled with me regardless of where I hung my professional hat. Diane from Neuratech said it best during our first official meeting at Elevate: "We don't hire agencies. We hire people who solve our problems. The logo on the invoice is secondary." 6 weeks after my departure, the industry newsletter that everyone pretended not to read but everyone definitely subscribed to published a brief item that sent shockwaves through agency circles. Vertex Digital Marketing announces leadership reorganization following significant client departures. Founder Marcus Reynolds stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic growth initiatives. COO Janet Myers elevated to interim CEO effective immediately. Translation: Marcus had been sidelined by his board after the financial impact of my departure, and the client exodus that followed became impossible to ignore. Zoe forwarded me the internal announcement, which was predictably filled with corporate euphemisms about exciting new chapters and streamlined operational focus. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Marcus had been effectively demoted. His authority curtailed after his mismanagement led to a 7-figure revenue loss. The best part, Zoe texted, is that they've created a new client relations officer position to try to stop the bleeding. Guess who they asked to lead it? You? I replied, already smiling. With a 30% raise and team of 3. Apparently. I'm suddenly valuable now that half the client knowledge walked out the door with you. Taking it? Negotiating for 40% and a better title. Then yes, for now. Learning opportunity. Smart move, I replied. Experience first, then leverage it. The lessons from my journey weren't lost on her, or on others watching from the periphery. 3 more Vertex employees reached out in the following weeks, testing waters about potential opportunities at Elevate. I didn't actively recruit them, no need to give Marcus any ammunition for legal complaints, but I did make sure Alexandra knew about their capabilities should positions become available. At Elevate, we quickly established new processes for our transferred clients, improving on the systems I'd developed at Vertex rather than simply recreating them. Without Marcus's micromanagement and budget constraints, we delivered better results. At comparable costs, strengthening client relationships even further. 2 months after my departure, I finally ran into Marcus at an industry conference. I'd been on a panel discussing digital strategy evolution, while he lurked in the audience, noticeably less cocky than in previous years. We crossed paths during the networking hour, an encounter that couldn't be avoided in the crowded reception area. He looked tired, the confidence in his stance diminished. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, but professional norms prevailed. "Emily," he acknowledged stiffly. "Quite the splash you've made." "Change creates opportunity," I replied neutrally. "For everyone involved." His smile was tight. "Some might call it opportunistic. Others might call it market correction." I countered. "Talent and value finding their proper level." He glanced around, noting several industry peers watching our interaction with poorly disguised interest. "Well, I wish you luck. This industry has many cycles. Today's rising star is tomorrow's cautionary tale." I sipped my sparkling water, letting his attempted intimidation dissolve into the ambient conversation around us. "You know, Marcus, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." He raised an eyebrow, wary. "Thank you," I said simply. "For what?" Confusion replaced his defensiveness. "For telling me I was lucky to have a job at Vertex." It was the clarity I needed to create something better. I didn't wait for his response, simply nodded politely and moved on to join Alexandra's conversation with a potential client. Some victories don't require the last word, they speak for themselves in quarterly revenue reports and client testimonials. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights and reflecting on the journey. In just 3 months, I'd gone from an undervalued employee to a partner in a growing firm, bringing $400,000 in client relationships with me and fundamentally altering the power dynamics of my professional community. Not through underhanded tactics or contract violations, but through the methodical building of authentic value that transcended company boundaries. I hadn't just changed jobs, I'd changed the narrative about what talent is worth and who holds the real power in service relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, board approved expanded scope for Q3. Doubling previous engagement. Contract tomorrow? I smiled, typing back a quick affirmation. The work was just beginning, and now it would be built on proper foundation, one where value was recognized, compensated, and respected rather than taken for granted. Marcus had been right about one thing: I had been lucky. Lucky to receive such a clear demonstration of my worth through his attempt to diminish it. Lucky to have prepared my exit long before I knew I'd need it. Lucky to have built client relationships based on genuine value rather than institutional inertia. But luck, as they say, favors the prepared. And I had been preparing for this moment from the day I first noticed the disconnect between my contribution and my compensation. Not with bitterness or sabotage, but with strategic clarity about where true professional value resides. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for your worth, though that was certainly part of it. The deeper insight was recognizing that in the knowledge economy, power flows to those who create irreplaceable value, regardless of their position on an organizational chart. Marcus thought he held all the cards because he owned the company. What he failed to understand was that in professional services, the company is often just a vehicle for talent. And talent, when not properly valued, becomes remarkably mobile. I finished my tea and went inside to prepare for tomorrow's client meeting. There was still much to build at Elevate, systems to create, relationships to strengthen. But the foundation was solid now, built on mutual respect, recognized value, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you bring to the table. The message to others facing their own Marcus moments was clear: document your value. Build relationships based on results. Prepare your exit before you need it. And when someone tells you you're lucky to have a job, recognize it for what it truly is: not a reality check, but a revelation that you've outgrown your current container. Then use that clarity to build something better, not just for yourself, but for everyone who recognizes true value when they see it. 6 months into my partnership at Elevate Strategic Partners, the transformation was even more profound than I'd anticipated. What began as a calculated exit strategy had evolved into something far more significant: not just a career change, but a complete reinvention of my professional identity and impact. Our office had expanded to a larger space in the same building, taking over the entire 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed our workspace in natural light. A fitting metaphor for the transparency that now defined my professional life, in stark contrast to the shadowy politics at Vertex. First quarter projections are finalized, Alexandra announced during our Monday partner meeting, sliding tablets across the conference table to me and our 2 other partners, James and Vivian. Emily's client portfolio has exceeded initial forecasts by 22%. I scrolled through the numbers, satisfaction warming my chest. Neuratech had expanded their engagement twice already. Garrison Properties had referred 2 of their development partners to us. Lumina Health had brought us into their international expansion planning, a project that would have never been entrusted to Vertex under Marcus's leadership. The Neuratech case study is generating serious attention, James added, our business development leader and newest partner before me. 3 potential clients specifically mentioned it during introductory calls last week. That case study, documenting how we'd helped Neuratech launch their consumer AI platform with 40% higher engagement than industry averages, had become our most effective calling card. We'd been transparent about the transition from Vertex, positioning it as a natural evolution that allowed us to better serve the client's complex needs. The before and after metrics spoke volumes. Speaking of attention, Vivian said, glancing at her phone, Emily, you might want to check your email. The industry award finalists were just announced. I opened my inbox to find the notification. Elevate had been named a finalist for Boutique Agency of the Year, and I was personally nominated for Strategist of the Year. The nominations specifically cited the innovative campaign structure we'd implemented for Neuratech, work that had begun in concept at Vertex but had only been fully realized under Elevate's more supportive framework. Congratulations, Alexandra said, genuine pleasure in her voice. No hint of jealousy or competition, just shared celebration of collective success. Well-deserved recognition. This is team success, I insisted, meaning it. I couldn't have executed at this level without the infrastructure we've built together. And that was the truth. While I'd brought valuable client relationships and strategic vision, Elevate had provided the fertile ground those seeds needed to truly flourish. Here, ideas weren't filtered through ego or political calculation. Resources were allocated based on client needs rather than internal hierarchies. Creativity was valued over conformity. The contrast with my previous environment couldn't have been more stark or more instructive. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Zoe waiting. She'd finally made the jump from Vertex 3 months after my departure, joining Elevate as a senior account strategist after her client relations officer role proved to be more about damage control than actual strategy. Have you seen this? She held out her phone, displaying an industry news site. The headline made my breath catch: Vertex Digital announces restructuring, layoffs following major client losses. I took the phone, scanning the article quickly. Zoe forwarded me the internal announcement, which was predictably filled with corporate euphemisms about exciting new chapters and streamlined operational focus. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Marcus had been effectively demoted. His authority curtailed after his mismanagement led to a 7-figure revenue loss. The best part, Zoe texted, is that they've created a new client relations officer position to try to stop the bleeding. Guess who they asked to lead it? You? I replied, already smiling. With a 30% raise and team of 3. Apparently. I'm suddenly valuable now that half the client knowledge walked out the door with you. Taking it? Negotiating for 40% and a better title. Then yes, for now. Learning opportunity. Smart move, I replied. Experience first, then leverage it. The lessons from my journey weren't lost on her, or on others watching from the periphery. 3 more Vertex employees reached out in the following weeks, testing waters about potential opportunities at Elevate. I didn't actively recruit them, no need to give Marcus any ammunition for legal complaints, but I did make sure Alexandra knew about their capabilities should positions become available. At Elevate, we quickly established new processes for our transferred clients, improving on the systems I'd developed at Vertex rather than simply recreating them. Without Marcus's micromanagement and budget constraints, we delivered better results. At comparable costs, strengthening client relationships even further. 2 months after my departure, I finally ran into Marcus at an industry conference. I'd been on a panel discussing digital strategy evolution, while he lurked in the audience, noticeably less cocky than in previous years. We crossed paths during the networking hour, an encounter that couldn't be avoided in the crowded reception area. He looked tired, the confidence in his stance diminished. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, but professional norms prevailed. Emily, he acknowledged stiffly. Quite the splash you've made. Change creates opportunity, I replied neutrally. For everyone involved. His smile was tight. Some might call it opportunistic. Others might call it market correction. I countered. Talent and value finding their proper level. He glanced around, noting several industry peers watching our interaction with poorly disguised interest. Well, I wish you luck. This industry has many cycles. Today's rising star is tomorrow's cautionary tale. I sipped my sparkling water, letting his attempted intimidation dissolve into the ambient conversation around us. You know, Marcus, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. He raised an eyebrow, wary. Thank you, I said simply. For what? Confusion replaced his defensiveness. For telling me I was lucky to have a job at Vertex. It was the clarity I needed to create something better. I didn't wait for his response, simply nodded politely and moved on to join Alexandra's conversation with a potential client. Some victories don't require the last word, they speak for themselves in quarterly revenue reports and client testimonials. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights and reflecting on the journey. In just 3 months, I'd gone from an undervalued employee to a partner in a growing firm, bringing $400,000 in client relationships with me and fundamentally altering the power dynamics of my professional community. Not through underhanded tactics or contract violations, but through the methodical building of authentic value that transcended company boundaries. I hadn't just changed jobs, I'd changed the narrative about what talent is worth and who holds the real power in service relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, board-approved expanded scope for Q3. Doubling previous engagement. Contract tomorrow? I smiled, typing back a quick affirmation. The work was just beginning, and now it would be built on proper foundation, one where value was recognized, compensated, and respected rather than taken for granted. Marcus had been right about one thing, I had been lucky. Lucky to receive such a clear demonstration of my worth through his attempt to diminish it. Lucky to have prepared my exit long before I knew I'd need it. Lucky to have built client relationships based on genuine value rather than institutional inertia. But luck, as they say, favors the prepared. And I had been preparing for this moment from the day I first noticed the disconnect between my contribution and my compensation. Not with bitterness or sabotage, but with strategic clarity about where true professional value resides. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for your worth, though that was certainly part of it. The deeper insight was recognizing that in the knowledge economy, power flows to those who create irreplaceable value, regardless of their position on an organizational chart. Marcus thought he held all the cards because he owned the company. What he failed to understand was that in professional services, the company is often just a vehicle for talent. And talent, when not properly valued, becomes remarkably mobile. I finished my tea and went inside to prepare for tomorrow's client meeting. There was still much to build at Elevate, systems to create, relationships to strengthen. But the foundation was solid now, built on mutual respect, recognized value, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you bring to the table. The message to others facing their own Marcus moments was clear: document your value. Build relationships based on results. Prepare your exit before you need it. And when someone tells you you're lucky to have a job, recognize it for what it truly is, not a reality check, but a revelation that you've outgrown your current container. Then use that clarity to build something better, not just for yourself, but for everyone who recognizes true value when they see it. 6 months into my partnership at Elevate Strategic Partners, the transformation was even more profound than I'd anticipated. What began as a calculated exit strategy had evolved into something far more significant, not just a career change, but a complete reinvention of my professional identity and impact. Our office had expanded to a larger space in the same building, taking over the entire 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed our workspace in natural light. A fitting metaphor for the transparency that now defined my professional life, in stark contrast to the shadowy politics at Vertex. First quarter projections are finalized, Alexandra announced during our Monday partner meeting, sliding tablets across the conference table to me and our 2 other partners, James and Vivian. Emily's client portfolio has exceeded initial forecasts by 22%. I scrolled through the numbers, satisfaction warming my chest. Neuratech had expanded their engagement twice already. Garrison Properties had referred 2 of their development partners to us. Lumina Health had brought us into their international expansion planning, a project that would have never been entrusted to Vertex under Marcus's leadership. The Neuratech case study is generating serious attention, James added, our business development leader and newest partner before me. 3 potential clients specifically mentioned it during introductory calls last week. That case study, documenting how we'd helped Neuratech launch their consumer AI platform with 40% higher engagement than industry averages, had become our most effective calling card. We'd been transparent about the transition from Vertex, positioning it as a natural evolution that allowed us to better serve the client's complex needs. The before and after metrics spoke volumes. Speaking of attention, Vivian said, glancing at her phone, Emily, you might want to check your email. The industry award finalists were just announced. I opened my inbox to find the notification. Elevate had been named a finalist for Boutique Agency of the Year, and I was personally nominated for Strategist of the Year. The nominations specifically cited the innovative campaign structure we'd implemented for Neuratech, work that had begun in concept at Vertex but had only been fully realized under Elevate's more supportive framework. Congratulations, Alexandra said, genuine pleasure in her voice. No hint of jealousy or competition, just shared celebration of collective success. Well-deserved recognition. This is team success, I insisted, meaning it. I couldn't have executed at this level without the infrastructure we've built together. And that was the truth. While I'd brought valuable client relationships and strategic vision, Elevate had provided the fertile ground those seeds needed to truly flourish. Here, ideas weren't filtered through ego or political calculation. Resources were allocated based on client needs rather than internal hierarchies. Creativity was valued over conformity. The contrast with my previous environment couldn't have been more stark or more instructive. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Zoe waiting. She'd finally made the jump from Vertex 3 months after my departure, joining Elevate as a senior account strategist after her client relations officer role proved to be more about damage control than actual strategy. Have you seen this? She held out her phone, displaying an industry news site. The headline made my breath catch. Vertex Digital announces restructuring, layoffs following major client losses. I took the phone, scanning the article quickly. Office downsizing. Focus on core competencies, always code for retreating to whatever still generated revenue. Marcus was quoted deep in the piece, his statement a masterclass in avoiding responsibility, market conditions and evolving client needs necessitate a more nimble approach to agency services. No mention of the $400,000 in client billing that had walked out the door with me, or the subsequent departures that followed as word of Vertex's internal dysfunction spread throughout the industry. I handed the phone back to Zoe, my expression carefully neutral. Predictable, unfortunately. They're saying it's market conditions, she said, incredulous. Not the fact that half their major clients left within 6 months. Easier than admitting they built the entire agency around personality rather than process, I observed. When Marcus's reputation couldn't sustain client relationships anymore, there was no infrastructure to fall back on. Unlike here, she noted, glancing around meaningfully at the collaborative spaces we'd designed specifically to foster knowledge sharing and reduce single points of failure in client service. That had been one of my first initiatives as partner. Creating systems that ensured no client was dependent on any single team member, including me. We documented strategies, cross-trained team members, and maintained shared resources that captured insights and institutional knowledge. Not to protect against departures, but to enhance collective intelligence and resilience. Any regrets? I asked Zoe, curious about her perspective since she'd stayed longer at Vertex after my departure. She considered the question seriously. About leaving? None. About not leaving sooner? Maybe. But I learned valuable lessons watching the implosion from the inside. Like what? Like how quickly confidence turns to desperation when it's not built on actual value, she said. Marcus went from strutting around like he owned the industry to practically begging clients to extend contracts within weeks. I nodded, unsurprised. And the team? Divided into camps. Those who blamed you for abandoning them, and those who recognized you'd simply done what many of them wished they had the courage to do. She smiled slightly. The second group got a lot larger as time went on. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert, client call in 15 minutes. We should grab lunch later this week, I suggested. I'd like to hear more about those final months. There are probably lessons we can apply here. Always the strategist, she said with an appreciative smile, heading back to her desk. Alone in my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. There was no vindictive pleasure in Vertex's struggles. Too many good people still worked there, people who had been caught in the crossfire of Marcus's ego and my departure. But there was undeniable validation in seeing the natural consequences unfold exactly as I'd anticipated. Systems built on individual exploitation rather than collective value creation were inherently unstable. Marcus had built Vertex as a monument to his own importance, taking credit for others' work while creating bottlenecks that forced all decisions through his limited perspective. When faced with a talent exodus, that structure had no resilience. No ability to adapt or evolve. The client call pulled me back to the present, Neuroteca's executive team waiting to review the quarterly strategy. I pushed thoughts of Vertex aside and focused on delivering the exceptional service that had become our hallmark at Elevate. 2 weeks later, the industry awards ceremony arrived, a black-tie affair at the city's most prestigious hotel ballroom. The Elevate team arrived together, energy high but expectations measured. As boutique newcomers competing against established players, we knew winning was a long shot. The nomination itself was victory enough for our first year. The networking hour before the ceremony provided its own form of validation. Colleagues from across the industry approached me with congratulations and curious questions about Elevate's rapid rise. Previous competitors now angled for potential collaborations. Former Vertex employees, some still with the company, sought discreet conversations about their own career paths. Then, across the crowded reception, I spotted Marcus. Noticeably less surrounded than at previous industry events, his small circle of conversation partners seemed more obligatory than enthusiastic. He looked older somehow, the strain of Vertex's decline etched in the tightness around his eyes. For a moment, our gazes met. I expected hostility, perhaps even a deliberate snub. Instead, he offered a small, resigned nod before turning back to his conversation. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, there was too much water under that bridge, but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of the new reality we both inhabited. I didn't approach him. Some conversations serve no purpose beyond ego, and I had left that game behind along with my Vertex business cards. Was that awkward? Alexandra appeared at my elbow, champagne flute in hand, having witnessed the silent exchange. Less than expected, I admitted. Sometimes success is the best response to disrespect. Speaking of success, she clinked her glass against mine. Win or lose tonight, what you've built in 6 months is remarkable. The whole industry has noticed. What we've built, I corrected. I couldn't have done this alone. True partnership, she agreed. But don't diminish your catalyst role. You turned client relationships into something portable because you understood what actually matters in service businesses. The lights dimmed, signaling it was time to find our tables for the ceremony. Our team was seated near the front, another sign of Elevate's rising prominence despite its youth. The categories proceeded with predictable pacing: creative awards, media innovation, campaign effectiveness. Finally, the Boutique Agency of the Year finalists appeared on the giant screens flanking the stage. And the winner is The presenter paused dramatically, opening the envelope with practiced flair. Elevate strategic partners. Our table erupted in controlled celebration, professional excitement rather than raucous victory. Alexandra squeezed my hand as we stood together, the entire Elevate team making our way to the stage as one unit rather than sending a single representative. Another deliberate choice that differentiated us from traditional agency hierarchies. Alexandra delivered our acceptance speech, graciously acknowledging our team, our clients, and the collaborative industry we were proud to be part of. No subtle digs at competitors, no self-aggrandizing claims of disruption or revolution. Just authentic gratitude and professional appreciation. As we returned to our table, congratulations pouring in from neighboring tables, I caught sight of Marcus again. He was typing rapidly on his phone, not watching the stage, his expression unreadable from this distance. Somehow, that told me everything. I needed to know about why our paths had diverged so dramatically. The Strategist of the Year category came later in the evening. I didn't win, the award went to a veteran with 20 years of innovative campaigns behind her, a choice I couldn't argue with. The nomination itself, coming less than a year after being told I was lucky to have a job, was victory enough. The afterparty flowed with champagne and industry gossip, but I found myself seeking quieter conversations rather than working the room. Genuine connections with potential collaborators, thoughtful discussions about evolving client needs, authentic exchanges with team members celebrating our collective achievement. Around midnight, as the event wound down, my phone buzzed with an unexpected text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. Congratulations. Well-deserved recognition for excellent work. W.G. Walter Garrison. The patriarch of Garrison Properties. Now our second-largest client, who rarely attended industry events and was even less likely to send personal messages. His acknowledgement carried particular weight, not just as a client, but as someone who had built his own empire from scratch. And recognized similar quality in others. I showed the message to Alexandra as our car service drove us home through rain-slicked streets. That's worth more than the award, she observed. Client respect isn't given, it's earned through consistent value delivery. It's what I tried to explain to Marcus months ago, I said, watching the city lights blur through the rain. Clients don't belong to agencies. They choose to work with people who solve their problems. His fundamental error, Alexandra agreed. Treating relationships as assets on a balance sheet rather than partnerships requiring constant nurturing. The car pulled up to my building, but before I got out, Alexandra touched my arm lightly. Emily, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. The growth trajectory we're on, it's exceeding our most optimistic projections. We need to think about expansion plans sooner than anticipated. I've been thinking about that too, I admitted. Neurotech alone could justify a technology specialization division. Exactly. And with the Garrison International Properties coming online next quarter. She let the implication hang in the air between us. We need specialized talent. I finished. And not just contractors, core team members who share our vision. She nodded. I'm thinking specifically about Vertex. With the layoffs and uncertainty, there must be good people looking for stability. Not poaching, that would be both unethical and unnecessary, but creating opportunity for talented professionals caught in a deteriorating situation. I'll put together some thoughts on structure and potential roles, I promised, mind already. Racing with possibilities. We could create something that addresses the specific failures they're experiencing, a genuine alternative rather than just a different logo. This is why you're a partner, she said with approval. Always seeing the strategic opportunity within the immediate situation. I entered my apartment still buzzing with ideas, despite the late hour. The contrast between this moment and where I'd been 1 year ago couldn't have been more profound. Then, I'd been swallowing my frustration in Marcus's office, being told my contributions didn't warrant even cost of living recognition. Now, I was helping shape the future of an award-winning agency that had already disrupted the market. The lesson was clear: value will always find its proper level, whether organizations recognize it or not. The key was refusing to internalize artificial limitations placed by others who benefited from your undervaluation. Over the next month, we carefully implemented our expansion plan. No direct solicitation of Vertex employees, we didn't need to resort to such tactics. Instead, we simply announced our new positions through industry channels and let natural market forces do the work. The applications flowed in, not just from Vertex, but from agencies across the city. Top talent attracted to our growing reputation. And the tangible results we were delivering for clients. But yes, a significant number came from my former workplace, people who had watched the transformation from both sides and made their own calculations. We hired selectively, focusing on cultural fit as much as technical skill. The goal wasn't to recreate Vertex's structure with different players, but to build something fundamentally stronger, a collective of specialists who thrive through collaboration rather than competition. 3 of our new hires came directly from Vertex's recent layoffs, including their former creative director who had finally tired of having innovative ideas shelved for safer, more derivative approaches. Their institutional knowledge proved valuable, but more important was the perspective they brought, appreciation for Elevate's transparent communication and collaborative approach after experiencing the alternative. The difference is accountability. Janet, the former creative director, explained during her first-month retrospective. At Vertex, blame flowed downward while credit flowed upward. Here, both are shared appropriately. This insight catalyzed an important addition to our core values document: explicit recognition that accountability must be bidirectional to be meaningful. Leaders accountable to their teams as much as teams to their leaders. A simple principle, with profound implications for how work was assigned, evaluated, and rewarded. As our team expanded, so did our client roster. The initial $400,000 I had brought with me had grown to over $1.2 million in annualized billing within 8 months. Not through aggressive sales tactics or unsustainable promises, but through exceptional delivery that generated organic referrals and expanded scopes. Word continued to filter back about Vertex's ongoing struggles. They had brought in a turnaround consultant who was implementing predictable cost-cutting measures and back-to-basics approaches. Marcus had been further sidelined, retaining his founder title but with diminishing operational influence. Then came the industry bombshell, a press release announcing Vertex's acquisition by MarketSphere, a holding company known for rolling up struggling agencies at discount valuations. The announcement was couched in enthusiastic corporate language about synergies and enhanced capabilities, but the financial terms revealed the truth: Vertex had been acquired for a fraction of its previous valuation. The news spread through Elevate's office like wildfire, though with more thoughtful analysis than gleeful celebration. This wasn't just about one agency's fall from grace, but a case study in how quickly perceived value could evaporate when not built on sustainable foundations. This actually explains the aggressive legal letter we received last week, Alexandra noted during our emergency partner meeting to discuss implications. She referred to a thinly veiled threat from Vertex's attorneys alleging systematic targeting of their clients and employees, allegations without specific evidence but with clear intimidation intent. Pre-acquisition posturing, James suggested. Trying to protect whatever client base they have left to justify the purchase price. Or setting up litigation as a potential revenue stream if the business itself can't be salvaged, Vivian added, always the pragmatic voice in our discussions. I considered both perspectives, then offered my own. I think it's simpler than that. Marcus making one final attempt to frame his failure as someone else's fault rather than the natural consequence of his leadership approach. Alexandra nodded. Slowly. Which means we respond professionally but firmly. No engagement with baseless accusations, just continued focus on ethical service delivery. And documentation, I added. Every client interaction, every hiring decision, all meticulously recorded to demonstrate our clean approach if it ever comes to that. The legal threats eventually dissipated after our attorneys responded with a detailed refutation of their vague claims. The acquisition proceeded, and industry attention shifted to speculation about how MarketSphere would integrate Vertex's remaining assets into their portfolio. For me, the most meaningful response came not through legal channels or industry gossip, but through a LinkedIn message from one of Vertex's junior designers who had been let go in the acquisition. I wanted to thank you, though we've never met. Your departure showed many of us what was possible when you value yourself properly. While I didn't land at Elevate, watching your journey gave me courage to demand better in my new role. You created ripples that affected more careers than you know. That message, more than the award or the financial success or the industry recognition, crystallized what this journey had truly been about. Not revenge or validation, though those elements existed, but demonstration. Showing what was possible when talent refused to accept artificial limitations or devaluation. I printed that message and pinned it to my office bulletin board, a reminder that our professional choices create templates others might follow, for better or worse. The responsibility that came with that influence shaped my leadership approach at Elevate more than any business school theory or management book ever could. 1 year to the day after Marcus had told me I was lucky to have a job, I sat in Elevate's conference room leading our quarterly all-hands meeting. Our team had grown to 28 people, our client roster to 17 active engagements, our revenue to just under $2 million annually. Measured growth, sustainable structures, deliberate culture building. Before we dive into department updates, I said to the assembled team, I want to acknowledge something important. 1 year ago today, I was told by a previous employer that I should be grateful just to have a job, regardless of compensation or recognition. A knowing murmur rippled through the room. Most were familiar with at least the outline of my professional journey. That moment could have been demoralizing. Instead, it became clarifying. It showed me exactly what I wouldn't accept in my professional life, which then illuminated what I would create instead. I gestured to the room. Around us, to the talented team we'd assembled, to the client work displayed on our walls. All of this, exists because of a fundamental belief that value deserves recognition. That talent thrives with support rather than limitation. That clients stay for results, not contracts. The room had gone quiet, everyone fully engaged. I share this anniversary not to dwell on the past, but because I want each of you to recognize that defining moments rarely announce themselves as such. They often arrive disguised as insults or obstacles or limitations. The key is recognizing when to push back, when to walk away, and when to build something better. Alexandra caught my eye from across the room, nodding slightly in approval. At Elevate, we're building that something better, together. Not perfect, not finished, but fundamentally aligned with the value we create rather than arbitrary hierarchies or personality cults. I raised my water glass in a toast. To recognizing our worth, to creating environments where others can do the same, and to the clarifying power of being underestimated, just once. The team raised their glasses, the moment resonating beyond simple corporate ritual. Many had experienced their own versions of that pivotal conversation with Marcus. Had swallowed their value for the security of a paycheck, had compromised their worth for the illusion of stability. Here, in this room, was the living alternative, proof that talent properly valued creates exponential returns, that clients reward authentic partnership, that professional fulfillment needn't be sacrificed at the altar of corporate convenience. As the meeting transitioned to department updates, I caught Zoe's eye across the table. She gave me a small thumbs up, from assistant watching from the sidelines to strategic partner in her own right, her journey paralleling mine in meaningful ways. The message was clear, not just for us but for anyone trapped in environments that diminish rather than develop. Your value isn't determined by those who benefit from minimizing it. Sometimes the greatest career catalyst is someone telling you, you're lucky to have what you've actually outgrown. And the best response isn't argument or acceptance, it's methodical, strategic reinvention that lets results speak louder than words ever could. 3 years after that pivotal moment in Marcus's office, the landscape had transformed completely. Elevate Strategic Partners had grown from a boutique agency with 4 partners to a respected industry force with 62 team members across 3 offices. Our client roster included multinational corporations alongside innovative startups. Our methodologies were featured in industry publications, and our culture had become known as a talent magnet in a competitive market. Today, I stood at the podium of the Regional Business Excellence Conference, looking out at 500 faces, agency peers, potential clients, industry analysts, all gathered to hear about building resilient organizations in a talent economy. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I'd been told I was dispensable. Now I was considered an authority on talent retention and organizational value creation. The fundamental shift in professional services isn't technological. I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies that still appeared before these large speaking engagements. It's philosophical. We've moved from an ownership economy to a value economy. Clients don't belong to agencies. Talent isn't owned by employers. Both flow naturally to where they're best understood, appreciated, and developed. I clicked to the next slide, a simple graph showing the inverse relationship between top-down control and sustainable growth in service organizations. The data is clear. Companies clinging to industrial-era power structures, where decisions flow down and credit flows up, are experiencing unprecedented talent drain. Meanwhile, organizations built on collaborative frameworks are seeing record retention rates and client stability. From my vantage point, I could see heads nodding, people leaning forward, some furiously taking notes. This wasn't just theory. To them, it was the daily reality of trying to build sustainable businesses in a market where talent had more options than ever before. When I was told I was lucky to have a job by a previous employer, I continued, sharing the story that had become something of a professional origin myth. It wasn't just personally insulting, it was strategically revealing. It showed a fundamental misunderstanding of where value actually resides in knowledge work. I paused, letting that sink in. The clients who followed me to my new venture didn't do so out of personal loyalty. They did so because the value they needed traveled with the talent that provided it. The colleagues who later joined our team didn't do so because of higher salaries alone. They came because they recognized an environment that would let them do their best work. As I continued through my presentation, illustrating key points with anonymized case studies and research data, I spotted a familiar face in the third row. Janet Myers, Marcus's former COO who had briefly become Vertex's interim CEO during its final decline before the acquisition. She caught my eye and gave a small, knowing nod. Her presence was unexpected but somehow fitting for this full circle moment. After concluding with actionable takeaways and fielding insightful questions from the audience, I found myself surrounded by attendees eager to continue the conversation. Business cards were exchanged, follow-up meetings requested, connections made. This was the part of professional growth I hadn't anticipated, the platform it would provide to influence broader industry thinking. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and Janet approached, extending her hand with a genuine smile. Powerful presentation, Emily. Particularly meaningful coming from someone who's lived both sides of the equation. Janet, I greeted her warmly, surprised by the lack of awkwardness. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm with Broughton Strategic now, she explained, referencing a well-respected consulting firm, leading their organizational development practice. Your journey has become something of a case study in our client work. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. In what context? Value migration, she said simply. How quickly organizational value can transfer when it's tied to human capital rather than fixed assets or brand legacy. Vertex is literally Exhibit A in our presentations. The mention of Vertex didn't sting anymore, it had become simply a data point in my professional narrative rather than an emotional touchstone. What happened after the MarketSphere acquisition? I asked, genuinely curious. The industry. Gossip dried up once the headline value faded. Janet's expression turned reflective. They stripped it for parts, essentially. Kept the client contracts they could salvage, absorbed some of the junior talent, and discarded the rest. The Vertex name exists only as a subsidiary line item on financial statements now. And Marcus? The question slipped out before I could consider whether I actually wanted to know. Consulting, she said with a slight shrug. Positioning himself as a turnaround specialist for struggling agencies, ironically enough. I believe he's on his third venture since the acquisition. I nodded, unsurprised. The pattern fit, taking lessons from failure but applying them to methodology rather than mindset. And you're thriving, clearly, Janet continued, gesturing to the conference program where my bio highlighted Elevate's growth trajectory. The industry whispers about the Elevate effect, how you've created a talent magnet that's reshaping client expectations. It's been a journey, I acknowledged. One with many architects beyond myself. A genuine smile crossed her face. That right there, that's the difference. Marcus would have claimed sole credit for success while distributing blame for failure. You do the opposite. Her observation hit home. The true transformation hadn't just been circumstantial, moving from one company to another, but fundamental, in how I conceived of leadership and value creation. Would you have time for coffee while we're both here? Janet asked. I'd love to compare notes on talent retention strategies. Broughton has some research I think would interest you. We arranged to meet the following morning, exchanging contact information with the ease of professionals who had moved beyond old tribal loyalties to focus on shared industry challenges. As I gathered my presentation materials, Alexandra joined me, having watched from the side of the room while handling calls related to our newest client acquisition. Wasn't that Janet Myers? She asked, curious rather than concerned. Indeed. She's with Broughton Strategic now, heading their org development practice. I shared the highlights of our brief conversation. Interesting how these professional orbits continue to intersect, Alexandra observed. 3 years ago, she was implementing Marcus's vision. Now she's studying why it failed. Evolution isn't limited to those who initiate change, I noted. Sometimes those who witness disruption learn the deepest lessons. We headed to the hotel restaurant for a late lunch, joining James and Vivian who had been attending different conference sessions. Our partnership had expanded to include 3 additional equity partners over the years, but the original 4 maintained a special bond forged in Elevate's formative days. Your session apparently caused quite a stir, James reported, scrolling through industry Twitter. The hashtag is flooding with quotes and takeaways, particularly that line about value flowing to where it's best understood. Any pushback? I asked, always interested in contrary perspectives that might sharpen our thinking. Some traditional agency heads questioning whether talent mobility undermines client stability, Vivian reported. The usual old guard resistance. But they're being ratioed by next-gen leaders agreeing with your premise. Our lunch conversation flowed naturally between conference insights, client developments, and strategic opportunities. This easy collaboration, the ability to challenge and support each other simultaneously, remained Elevate's core strength even as we grew. The contrast with my Vertex experience remained stark. There, meetings had been performances with predetermined outcomes, carefully choreographed to reinforce existing power structures. Here, genuine exploration and collaborative problem-solving took precedence over ego or hierarchy. After lunch, I excused myself for a call with Walter Garrison, who remained one of our most valued clients 3 years on. At 74, he had gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations of Garrison Properties, but still personally oversaw their relationship with Elevate. His son Michael handled implementation details, but strategic decisions remained firmly in Walter's experienced hands. Emily, his voice came through clear and direct as always. Just reviewed the quarterly strategy. Impressive foresight on the Sustainable Development Certification. Already opening doors with 2 municipal partners. I'm glad it's showing early results, I replied, genuinely pleased. The certification strategy had been a significant investment for Garrison, positioning them ahead of regulatory changes we had anticipated through careful research. More than results, Walter continued. It's changed the conversation completely. We're no longer just another developer seeking approvals, we're a partner in creating sustainable communities. This reframing had been a central element of our strategy, elevating Garrison from transaction-focused developer to vision-driven community creator. The shift had not only smoothed regulatory pathways but attracted premium commercial tenants seeking association with forward-thinking real estate partners. That's exactly the positioning we were aiming for, I acknowledged. Your team implemented the framework beautifully. Which brings me to the purpose of my call, Walter said, his tone shifting slightly. Michael and I have been discussing succession planning more concretely. He'll be taking majority ownership next quarter, with me transitioning to advisory board chairman. A well-earned transition, I said sincerely. Michael has shown tremendous growth over the past few years. Indeed. And he specifically requested that our agreement with Elevate be extended for 3 years as part of this transition. Stability in key partnerships being essential during leadership changes. The request represented not just continued revenue, but profound validation of our value. Garrison Properties had grown to become our largest client, representing nearly $800,000 in annual billing, twice what they had initially brought when following me from Vertex. We'd be honored to continue the partnership through this important transition and beyond, I told him. Excellent. Legal will send the paperwork next week. He paused, then added something unexpected. You know, Emily, watching your journey has influenced my succession planning approach considerably. In what way? I asked, surprised by the personal observation from a man typically focused on practical matters. You demonstrated how value can transfer seamlessly when properly recognized and respected, he explained. When you left your previous agency, you didn't diminish the value you provided to us, you enhanced it by placing it in a more supportive environment. It made me realize Michael doesn't need to replicate my methods to continue our company's success. He needs the right environment to express his own strengths. The parallel struck me deeply, how fundamental principles of value recognition applied across professional contexts, whether in agency relationships or family business succession. That's perhaps the most meaningful feedback I've received in my career, I told him honestly. After concluding the call, I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the significance of Walter's perspective. What had begun as a personal journey to proper valuation had evolved into a case study influencing business decisions far beyond my original scope. The ripple effects continued to expand in unexpected ways. That evening, the Elevate partners hosted a dinner for selected clients and prospects attending the conference. We had reserved a private dining room at the hotel's acclaimed restaurant, not ostentatious, but refined and conducive to meaningful conversation. 24 guests joined us, representing both existing client relationships and potential new engagements. The atmosphere was intentionally collegial rather than overtly sales-focused, a gathering of professionals with shared interests rather than a transparent business development event. Midway through the evening, Diane from Neuratech clinked her glass gently, drawing the room's attention. I hope you'll forgive the interruption, she began, but I felt compelled to share something with this group. 3 years ago, Neuratech was stuck in a familiar agency relationship, decent work, acceptable results, and chronic frustration at opportunities missed due to bureaucratic constraints. Knowing glances were exchanged around the table. A common experience for many present. When Emily and then Elevate entered our world, Diane continued, we experienced what true partnership actually means. Not just executing requests, but challenging assumptions. Not just delivering assets, but creating frameworks that drive sustainable growth. She raised her glass. The metrics tell the story. Our engagement rates are up 68% since the transition, conversion improved 42%, and our customer acquisition cost has decreased by a third. But the numbers don't capture the qualitative difference, the sense that we're working with partners who are as invested in our success as we are. The toast that followed felt like more than social ritual. It was acknowledgement of a fundamentally different approach to professional services, one built on aligned incentives rather than transactional exchanges. As dinner concluded and guests began to depart, I found myself in conversation with the CMO of Westridge Innovations, a company that had been with Vertex during my tenure there but had not followed me to Elevate. They had stayed with Vertex through its acquisition and subsequent absorption into Market Sphere. Fascinating to see how different paths unfold, he remarked, perhaps reading my thoughts. We seriously considered following you when you left, you know. What kept you with Vertex? I asked, genuinely curious rather than regretful. Inertia, frankly, he admitted. The cost of change seemed higher than the cost of continuity at the time. We miscalculated both. How so? We underestimated the connection between individual talent and institutional knowledge, he explained. After you and others left, we found ourselves constantly retraining new team members on our business fundamentals. The agency technically remained, but the understanding had departed. His candor was refreshing, offering valuable insight into client decision-making during transitions. We're with Market Sphere's premium division now, he continued. Adequate service, responsive. Enough. But watching Elevate's trajectory with Neurotech and others has been educational. Sometimes the higher initial switching cost yields exponential returns over time. The conversation illuminated something important: client decisions during talent transitions weren't always based on clear value assessments. Organizational inertia, perceived switching costs, and risk aversion played significant roles. Understanding these factors would help us refine our approach to similar situations in the future. As the conference concluded the following day, my coffee with Janet proved unexpectedly valuable. She shared Broughton's research on talent retention in creative industries, data that confirmed many of our intuitive approaches while challenging some assumptions we had never questioned. The most surprising finding, she noted as we finished our discussion, is how poorly financial incentives predict retention compared to decision-making authority. Creative professionals will accept lower compensation if they have greater control over their work product. That aligns with our experience, I confirmed. Our compensation is competitive but not industry-leading. Our retention rate, however, is nearly double the industry average. Because you've structured authority differently, she observed. Decision rights aligned with expertise rather than title. A lesson learned through its absence at Vertex, I acknowledged. Janet nodded thoughtfully. Marcus couldn't see it, still can't, from what I hear. He interpreted your departure and the subsequent client migration as personal betrayal rather than market efficiency in action. That perspective difference defines everything that followed, I noted. Seeing talent mobility as betrayal rather than natural value alignment creates defensive rather than adaptive responses. As we parted ways, Janet surprised me with an unexpected gesture. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. During that meeting when Marcus dismissed your very reasonable request, I said nothing. I was the HR presence who hid behind a blank screen rather than advocating for fair talent valuation. The reference to that pivotal moment, the HR director pretending to type notes while Marcus delivered his dismissive response, caught me off guard. I had almost forgotten that detail in the larger narrative. You were in a difficult position. I offered. Yes, but difficulty doesn't excuse compliance with dysfunctional systems, she countered. Watching the aftermath of that moment, what you built and what Vertex lost, has fundamentally changed how I approach my role in organizational dynamics. Her words stayed with me during the flight home, prompting reflection on how transformative moments ripple outward, affecting not just the primary participants but observers who carry those lessons into new contexts. Back at Elevate's headquarters the following week, I called an all-hands meeting to share key insights from the conference and announce the Garrison Properties contract extension. These regular transparent updates were central to our culture, ensuring everyone understood our strategic direction and celebrated collective wins. Looking out at our gathered team, from recent graduates to industry veterans who had chosen Elevate over more established competitors, I felt a profound sense of responsibility. These 62 people had entrusted their professional growth to the environment we had created. Their mortgage payments, childcare expenses, professional development, and career trajectories were all connected to decisions we made as leaders. The Garrison renewal isn't just financial security, I explained, concluding the business updates. It's validation of our fundamental approach, that client relationships flourish when built on partnership rather than dependency. Walter specifically cited our collaborative methodology as central to their decision to extend through their leadership transition. I paused, then shifted to a more personal reflection. When I left my previous position 3 years ago, I couldn't have envisioned this moment, this team, these clients, this collective impact. I knew only that I wouldn't accept devaluation of my contribution, and that others deserved the same respect. The room had gone quiet, everyone fully engaged. Each of you made a similar choice in joining Elevate. You chose an environment that promised to recognize your unique value contribution rather than treating talent as interchangeable. That collective choice is what has built this company, not just partner decisions or client wins, but the daily commitment to excellence that each of you brings. I gestured to the wall where we displayed our core values, not as corporate platitudes, but as operational principles that guided daily decisions. Value flows to where it's best understood. That's become something of a mantra in our industry discussions, but it's more than a clever phrase. It's the fundamental market dynamic that each of us navigates throughout our careers. The question isn't whether value will flow, it's whether organizations will create environments that attract and nurture it, or build dams trying to contain it. Zoe, now our Director of Client Strategy, caught my eye from across the room and gave a subtle thumbs up. She had been there from the beginning, had witnessed the transformation from both sides, and understood perhaps better than anyone the profound contrast between constraint and enablement in professional environments. As we continue growing, I concluded, let's maintain this central truth: our success isn't built on controlling talent, but on creating the conditions where talent can create maximum value, for clients, for the company, and for individual growth. That alignment of interests isn't just morally right, it's strategically unbeatable. The applause that followed felt like affirmation of a shared vision rather than perfunctory response to a leadership address. This wasn't just my journey anymore. It belonged to everyone who had chosen to join the alternative we had created together. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected email that brought the journey full circle. The subject line was simple: perspective, and the sender was Marcus Reynolds. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what communication from my former boss might contain after 3 years of silence. Curiosity won out over caution. Emily, the message began without preamble. Your keynote at the Regional Business Excellence Conference has generated significant discussion. While I disagree with several of your assertions regarding organizational structure, your results speak for themselves. The purpose of this note is not to debate methodology but to acknowledge the objective success you've achieved since our professional paths diverged. Congratulations on building something meaningful. Marcus, no apology, no admission of error, not even direct reference to our history. Yet between the lines lay a reluctant recognition that the market had rendered its verdict on our competing approaches to value creation. I didn't respond immediately, letting the significance of this unexpected communication settle. There was no need for the last word, no requirement to acknowledge his belated recognition. The results: Elevate's growth, Vertex's dissolution. The industry shift toward talent-centric structures spoke more eloquently than any reply I might craft. 3 years after being told I was lucky to have a job, I had helped create dozens of jobs that people felt lucky to have, not from gratitude for employment alone, but because they enabled authentic contribution, growth, and recognition. The contrast couldn't have been more complete. That evening, I met Alexandra for our traditional monthly dinner, a practice we had maintained since Elevate's founding, ensuring regular connection beyond daily operations. To 3 years of proving value finds its level, she proposed as we clinked glasses. And to all the voices that told us it couldn't be done, I added with a smile. Including some of our own, she acknowledged. I remember questioning whether we could actually support the client volume that followed you initially. Healthy doubt keeps us honest, I observed. Blind confidence is as dangerous as groundless insecurity. She nodded thoughtfully. What I find most remarkable isn't just what we built, but how it's influencing the broader industry. The number of agencies restructuring their talent approaches, the clients demanding different relationship models. The ripple effect, I agreed. Change one dynamic and others naturally follow. We spent the remainder of dinner discussing Elevate's future, expansion possibilities, capability development, succession planning for long-term sustainability. Not just growth for growth's sake, but deliberate evolution to create something that could outlast any individual contributor, even the founders. Later, walking home through quiet streets, I reflected on the journey that a single dismissive comment had catalyzed. Marcus telling me I was lucky to have a job hadn't just prompted my departure, it had sparked a fundamental reassessment of professional value dynamics that continued to influence decisions across the industry. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for personal worth, though that remained essential. It was about recognizing when existing structures no longer serve the value they claim to organize, and having the courage to create alternatives rather than just criticizing the status quo. The $400,000 in client revenue that had followed me to Elevate had grown to over $5 million in 3 years. But the more meaningful metric wasn't financial, it was the number of professionals who had found an environment where their contribution was properly valued, where their growth was actively encouraged, where their voice influenced meaningful decisions. That environment hadn't existed until we created it. It wouldn't have existed if I had simply accepted Marcus's assessment of my professional worth. Sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from the most dismissive moments, when someone underestimates exactly what they shouldn't. The key is recognizing those moments not as defeats but as invitations to prove precisely how wrong they are, not through argument or resentment, but through methodical creation of the alternative they couldn't imagine was possible. 3 years, 62 team members, and $5 million in client revenue later, that alternative wasn't just possible. It was thriving, growing, and reshaping expectations across an entire industry. All because someone once thought I should be grateful just to have a job. I wasn't just grateful anymore. I was transformative. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.